So, very good to see so many of you with us today. I think we're still letting people in. Wonderful to see you all. Looking forward to talking about creating community-driven pathways to equitable open scholarly publishing with 3 EC-funded projects, DIAMAS, Craft OA, and PALOMERA. So whilst people still join us, again, if you could turn off your microphone and then turn off your camera once we get started with the speakers so that we can then focus on the faces of the speakers. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks. So I think you all know that this is recorded. If you don't feel comfortable being shown on the recording or being part of the discussions, then now is your time to leave. We would also like you to put your questions in the chat, and there'll be somebody monitoring those questions. So we'd really like to encourage you to ask questions. We're also going to involve you in the discussions later on. So that's some of the housekeeping. Are we still admitting people? I think I can start. So my name is Vanessa Proudman. I'm the director of Spark Europe, and that's a foundation that's working to make open the default in Europe. And I have the pleasure of being your host today on behalf of the DIAMAS project, one of those 3 EC funded projects who are really going to talk in depth about a very important topic. I'd also like to thank our friends at LIBA who have been organizing this event, and we have Oliver in the background. So thank you very much on that front too. So I'd like to warmly welcome you to the first in a series of events where we're going to be looking at how do we build community-driven pathways to equitable open scholarly publishing. So this is the first in a series, and we're going to take you on a road to creating a more open and equitable quality scholarly publishing ecosystem, together with 3 different EC-funded projects that are connected on this topic: DIAMAS, Craft OA, and PALOMERA. And amongst ourselves, there are 40 partners, but many of those partners also represent hundreds of institutions. So we hope that we represent a large percentage of the community, but we are growing that, and this is also one of the reasons that we have this event today, to reach out much more broadly than our partners could ever do. So today we are setting out our vision for a community-driven pathway to equitable open scholarly publishing. And we're also interested in what you think, and we look forward to your input and questions. And as I said, please do put those in the chat. So before we get going, just a few words from my side on the topic. So of course, we're not alone in seeking for more equity in open access. There's great regulatory power in policymakers such as the UN's SDGs, the UNESCO recommendation on open science, the recent European Council conclusions, or even the Cape Town Statement on Research Integrity. So many of us are looking at also the costs of OA publishing and how do we sustain a strong OA future following principles of equity and diversity. Many of us believe that we really need to reduce some of the volume-based revenue-driven models and financial barriers that are in the way of a brighter future for publishing. And we're doing this by many of us focusing on OA diamond publishing. You'll hear more about that today. We're also seeing a huge momentum for increased equity, and we're part of that action, and we will be for years to come. We have quite some work to do. What we really want to do is to help alleviate some of those inequities and injustices in the current OA publishing landscape amongst researchers through our action. So that means supporting research-intensive researchers from STM and the humanities and social sciences, but also from the smaller organizations who are less research-intensive, supporting those who are professors, as well as early career researchers, those with deep funding pockets and those with none, And we also want to support those who are putting policy and research into practice, like practitioners in the health field, SMEs, and society in general. What we are also all celebrating is multicultural and multilingual diversity in publishing. That's key to our work. And our projects also believe that we can be better together by being more intentional about how we engage with our broad range of OA publishing stakeholders, by answering some of the larger common needs together that cross geographical, cultural boundaries, whilst at the same time respecting the different contexts, be they political, economic, or social. So we can do this by strategically prioritizing equity and, above all, partnerships to build capacity for open access in our community, which is why we've brought you to join us today, to also help us shape a more equitable open access future. So next up, we have several experts with us who would like to share their vision on this topic, and I'm sure they will tell us what that looks like and why a joined up and collaborative approach to open access publishing is so important now more than ever before. So I'm going to invite the DIAMAS project first to tell us a bit more about the DIAMAS project and to talk to that vision that I just spoke of. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Johan Rorik, who's the Executive Director of Coalition S and co-PI of the DIAMAS project. And in the background, Pierre Mounier, who will also join in the conversation. He's the Associate Director for International Development of Open Edition at Aix-Marseille University, and he's the other co-PI of the DIAMAS project. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. In addition to being Executive Director of Coalition S and co-PI on the project, I'm also the editor of a Diamond Open Access journal. So that is also a quality I would like to take to this discussion today. Let me share my screen with you if I can find it. Yes, here it is. Yes, so the webinar today, as Vanessa mentioned, is how the three projects share this vision for equitable open access, equitable open scholarly publishing, because we think that these three projects share that vision, and so I was asked to present the project and to talk about how that project addresses those issues of equity. First of all, about the project itself, it brings together 23 public service organizations from 12 European countries, funders like Coalition S, but also Spark Europe, Science Europe, EUA, European University Association, various universities, various open access publishers, and the budget is about 3 million with Horizon Europe funding. As Vanessa already mentioned, we started in September 2022. We had a big meeting at Zadar to kick off the project. And the project is going to take about 36 months. We are well underway with it. Project objectives are quite ambitious. Namely, we want to provide the research community with an aligned, high-quality scholarly communication ecosystem that is capable of implementing open access as a publication practice across the European research area. So what we want to do is basically create this from the bottom up, be very attentive to the communities who are already doing Diamond Open Access. That's why we launched the survey. And this is why we want to create a community that supports services and non-technical infrastructure for what we call IPSPs, Institutional Publishing Service Providers, which is an acronym for all those people who are publishing journals and publishing books also, but especially in the DIAMAS project for journals, publishing journals in the context of an academic institution, so most of the time in Diamond Open Access. And what we want to do in that project is to develop common standards, guidelines, and practices to align these journals over time. What we found with an initial study before this project started was that, in fact, there's a lot of Diamond Open Access journals in Europe, but they vary in quality, in terms of sustainability, in terms of guidelines, in terms of practice and standards. And so that's why we want to develop these common standards, guidelines, and best practices to create a network and to create a community of these journals, so that we can all also really provide an alternative to commercial publishing. And we will lay down these guidelines, standards, and best practices in what we call an extensible quality standard for institutional publishing. Extensible, why? Because we believe there is not a single standard. We have to see the standard a little bit as a jazz tune, if you like. You have a tune, but then you have variations on it. And variations is what is embedded in the term extensible. Namely, there will be variations across disciplines, across languages, across regions of this fundamental quality standard that we want to put forward. So basically, two acronyms you need to remember: IPSPs and EXIP, standing for the things that I just defined. So the DIAMAS project is first about understanding the landscape. So we are doing this survey. We are analyzing the results of that survey. We had 700 responses to that. We are also benchmarking the current IPSPs to see where they stand in terms of these quality standards. Then the second part of the project will be about improving coordination, quality, and sustainability of IPSP. So we will talk to them. We will see what they see as those variations on EXIP, and how to determine that, and how to create this big family of quality standards and variations on that theme. And then the third aspect of the project is really about formulating policies, recommendations, and engagement to engage politicians, universities, libraries in this effort to make sure that we create a network, a sustainable network, and a sustainable capacity center to support Diamond Open Access in Europe. So these are the deliverables of the project. Sorry, that jumped. I don't know why. These are the various deliverables of the project: an IPSP database, a quality standard for institutional publishing, a tool suite and guidelines, recommendations and guidelines, and most importantly, the last one for us is we will create the building blocks for a capacity hub for Diamond Open Access publishing in Europe. So basically, you have to see this as a service center where basically other capacity centers could align with, or the journals could immediately address with. You have to see this as a kind of a shop where editors, but libraries, all people interested in Diamond Open Access could come shop and take the necessary tools to build or to improve their own Diamond Open Access journal and get the services that they need for that purpose. That is our ambition here. So the ultimate goal is really to make that capacity hub. We will also add technical infrastructure to this in 5 years via the Craft OA project that Margot is going to talk about in a minute, which is coordinated by the University of Göttingen. And we have to see this Diamond Hub really not as I often say, as an ugly building in Brussels, another ugly building in Brussels, but as a virtual distributed network of resources, where you really have a distributed infrastructure that is supporting all of these journals, and that itself is part of a global federation for Diamond Open Access, which is another thing that we are in the business of creating, and that will be discussed at the Diamond Summit in Toluca, Mexico at the end of October. And you are hereby all cordially invited to that meeting, where we will try to set up a global federation for Diamond Open Access with various regional centers. Among which at least a European Diamond Hub. So this is the way you have to see this. In fact, the idea is this: you have a global federation for open scholarly publishing with a European capacity hub, which interacts in turn with national capacity centers, which will certainly pop up in the near future. Various funders and organizations are already thinking about that, or have them already, as in Spain and in Croatia. But of course, the capacity center can also interact directly with institutional publishers and service providers. And so that is the network that we create on one side. The European Capacity Hub is, of course, mirrored in Latin America by a similar capacity center with two regional hubs that you can imagine the names behind those, I am sure. And you could do the same, of course, for parts of Asia, for Africa, and for North America. So that is the idea of how we see this federation of capacity hubs across the world. So as you can see, we are not lacking in ambition with this capacity hub. How does this add to the important issue of today, namely equity? Now, of course, you know that Diamond Open Access is equitable because there are no financial obstacles for equitable participation in this scholarly discussion. No readers pay for access to information. So that is equitable by nature and design. Editors and institutional publishers will also be profiting from this because they get equitable access to up-to-date resources and services in the Diamond Hub. And so that they can set up and run high quality journals for their communities. So no more flipping a journal, and I'm referring to a recent case that you know here, no more flipping a journal from a high APC to a slightly lower APC at another commercial publisher. No, you can flip immediately to Diamond Open Access, which is, as some of you know, a long-time dream of mine. And this is also a meeting place for communities of journals where we can learn from each other, communities in the same discipline or the same language where best practices can be discussed and exchanged. Again, equitable access for all, and help these journals all meet international standards in publishing to create this equitable vision. Put the 2 crates under the smaller journals where you only put 1 crate under the bigger journal that already has some support. That's the idea of the image on the right. Same thing for service providers, and we don't exclude service providers, even commercial service providers in Diamond Open Access. They can provide services like technical services like copy editing and typesetting and submission systems. And we can create a fair virtual marketplace where people can, where various service providers can offer services and can negotiate these with institutional publishers. Finally, also a place where funders and ministries can level up their policies, align their policies, look at best practices, organizational templates, recommendations, and technical infrastructures, so that again there we can align policies across the European community and hopefully across the world. And this is where I will stop my presentation. Thank you. That was 10 minutes exactly.
Thank you so much, Johan, and also for sharing that vision for the global approach to capacity building. It looks very stable with all those nodes and those connections as if it's all already existing, but I know that's your vision. So I would really like to hear, so you were saying that the model in itself is equitable by nature and design, but you also touched upon the aspect that, of course, in the whole OA Diamond publishing environment, there is not necessarily the equity that we would wish for, and you touched on what we might do. What are the biggest challenges to create a more equitable space for the OA Diamond publishers across the globe? You're on mute.
I muted myself, sorry. Yeah, I think the most important challenge, but Pierre should also come into this discussion, the most important challenge is to get it organized. One of the things that we noticed is a few years ago with the Diamond Open Access Diamond Journal study is how isolated these journals are. First of all, we had no idea that there were so many journals across the world. And secondly, we had no idea that they were so isolated. I mean, and this is, of course, because we all work in our own bubbles, right? I mean, you know, there's Open Edition in France, which is very well organized for Diamond journals. There's the Croatian journals that are quite well organized. So we all tend to think that in our little bubble in the world, things are fine. But in fact, what you see is that these journals are really completely, you know, there's an archipelago of journals that are trying to do the right thing, each in their own corner, and the challenge really is how to build those bridges, how to make sure that those journals come together and that they discuss in the same discipline, that they try to level up, try to align. How do we do that? And for that we need this distributed infrastructure, and this is something that we will have to build, and obviously we will need money for that. We will have to find money for that in the same way as we find money for other infrastructures in science. And the reference that I often make is, well, how do we pay for the Large Hadron Collider? We should do the same for the Diamond infrastructure. This is our infrastructure. It's our research. We need to build the infrastructure for it.
So you could argue that many of those, they have been around for a very long time and have lived very happily on their own independently. Why would they need to build those bridges or to work together? So I think I can see a challenge there for you. You say we need to organize it.
We do not want, I think obviously we do not want to tell people what to do, right? I mean, people do not want to join, that is entirely fine. But what the study also found is that many of these journals, actually the majority of these journals, are not financially sustainable long-term or lack also governance that is sustainable long-term. And so what we want to engage basically is a conversation. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? I can give an example from my own practice, for instance, with my own journal, Glossa, a journal of general linguistics. You know, I mean, we were very proudly said, well, the journal is in the hands of the academic community. It's in the hands of the editorial team and board. Until Pierre showed up and told me, well, you know, that doesn't work, because in order to own something, you have to be a legal body. A legal body, only legal bodies can own titles. And I said, really? And then I went and, you know, we had a foundation, and we made sure that the foundation, Lingoa, Linguistics in Open Access, owned the title Glossa. So that, in fact, you know, we added to our governance this idea that the foundation would own the legal title, and we also made sure that the legal title could never be sold or traded. So, you know, even if you think you're doing the right thing, you can always learn something more. And this is what I learned from Pierre, as I learn from Pierre every day, by the way. But Pierre, I'm handing you the floor.
No, Vanessa, I just want to answer your one part of your sentence when you said that actors were living quite happily until so far. I'm not sure that the different actors of Diamond Publishing are living happily until so far, because a lot of them are underfunded, they are lacking capacity, their voice is not heard in the governance of the global, let's say, publishing ecosystem, and they lack recognition and acknowledgement for the work that they are doing, and support. So the way we identify the challenge is that we have this situation because precisely this community is not coordinated enough, or is not really not coordinated. And if we join all the actors together to speak with one voice and to be represented and recognized as a community and as a coordinated community, then it will improve the situation of everyone in this community. So that's the main idea.
I was, of course, provoking you with my question. I would love you, could you just, before we end this short session, because I know we could speak about this for a long while, could you say how DIAMAS is engaging with its community? So to explore how can we add value, to show that those bridges are really so important, and how we're creating a new community with DIAMAS. Can you just give one example or two of how we're doing that, or how you'd like to do more of it in the future?
So I can provide two concrete answers to that. So you have to understand that the DIAMAS project is less than 1 year old. So we are in the first phase of the development of the project. And the first thing that we had to do was to better understand and to better map the landscape. So for example, we did a survey that we opened to everyone with a lot of open questions so that people could also express themselves and express their point of view. And now we are in the process of collecting and analyzing all these answers coming from a wide range of actors across the community at European level, at least, with more than 700 respondents to the survey. So that's one way to engage with the community and to be sure that the voices of the community is heard. But of course, it's not the only one. Based on that, as Johan mentioned, we are going to build up several tools to gather the community, such as the registry of IPSPs, such as the forum that will be attached to the registry, where once again the different actors of the community will find a way to express themselves and to talk to each other, because a good way also to give power to the community is to enable people to talk to each other, to coordinate, to develop joint projects, to find opportunities within the community to work together. And the third point is that all the tools, or most of the tools that we are going to develop and that Johan presented, such as the registry of resources, for example, such as the toolkit, tool suites, etc., will be contributory. So it will be based on the contributions coming from the community. So we will ask you in the coming weeks and months to contribute to those common tools which are aimed at serving the whole community. So it's not only us developing tools for the community, it's the community contributing to this gathering of resources and giving back to the community. So that's
Thank you. Thank you so much. That co-creation, I think, is really important for DIAMAS. I'm part of the DIAMAS project. So we would really like to invite you to, when you hear about some of those events, please do join us, because the more voices, the better we can serve you and understand what you need, and that it will end up being used by the community we're building this for. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go for the next 10 or 15 minutes. I know the community would love to hear more from DIAMAS. But I'm going to now, you will join us back on the panel after we've talked to the other two projects. Margot Bargheer, I'd like to call you to the floor. So Margot Bargheer is the head of electronic publishing at the State and University Library of Göttingen at the University of Göttingen. And she's also the project lead of the EC-funded Craft OA project. So really looking forward to hearing about Craft OA and also about your vision. Margot, have you got slides that you'd like to share, or?
I have slides that I'd like to share.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is the wrong one. Here we go. Maybe somebody just talks while I get myself ready. Okay.
So I'm also encouraging you to add your questions in the chat. We won't have so much time to ask the project's individual questions, so I'd like you to put those in the chat. We'd like to dedicate most of the time to discussion today. So any questions you've got to DIAMAS or any of the other projects, just put them in the chat. Thank you very much for that. I think, are we ready?
We are. So thank you for filling in. So this, most of what I will be talking about, Johan has already prepared the ground, and there's a reason, because Craft OR is going to be the project that paves the technical and organizational ground for what is laid out in DIAMAS. Because the situation that Johan just described, journals being happily pondering on their own, this is in reality not really the case, because it usually means that some overworked researchers will try to get their journal going, and they will probably invest more of their time into collecting content, to finding good authors, finding good reviewers, than trying to scale up their operation in a technical sense. And this is where we try to come in with Craft OA. What does it stand for? This is not totally out of the blue that it's called Craft OA. It stands for Creating a Robust, Accessible, Federated Technology for Open Access. And it's meant to look at journals, and it's not going to look at funding problems and research assessment, because those are problems also as well. They are huge challenges in open access publishing, but this project is really focusing on technology and organizational aspects around technology. And that's why there has a connotation to craft beer, because that means strengthening the local sector, strengthening local expertise, and networking around a common vision. What we also see, and this is one of the strengths of this sector, which is something like the long tail of science, because they are really thousands of these journals that manage to live on their own without a publisher around them, or maybe the publisher is just running, or maybe 2 or 3 journals. So they manage in a way, and that means they have their own expertise already. And we're not trying to change things how they are done, but rather say, let's improve what is there. And that means that room for experiments should be there, because science is, at the end of the day, it's experiments, it's trying out, it's exploring, but at the same time building on renowned knowledge and also on common standards. I'll leave this out because basically Johan has covered it all, and Rob asked in the chat whether we share the slides. Absolutely. So I won't talk you through this again. Craft OA has, there are a few parameters you can read yourself, so I won't read it for you. We, as Göttingen coordinated, and in her introduction, Vanessa made it clear why we do this, because we run a publishing service ourselves, and this is the beauty of the consortium of Craft OA. The majority of partners is publishing themselves already, which means that we know about the pains, we know about the challenges, we struggle, we need to learn, and we have the a priori assumption that if it helps one of our partners, then most likely it's also going to help other publishers, other publishing services, other institutional publishers, other journals. And so we aim to provide technical improvements for journals and platforms, and we believe, and we are convinced, that if we have communities of practice, these individual journals and publishers move out of the situation that they constantly need to innovate on themselves and need to find out how to compete, how to accommodate the needs of data aggregators, how to stay up to date, and that these communities of practice will, for instance, lead into such a capacity center, because the capacity center is living of the expertise of people. And we also aim at overcoming this dilemma of you're not visible enough, therefore you're not discoverable enough, therefore you're not recognized enough, therefore you have problems to find good authors and good editors, and you don't get out of this dilemma. And we're funded under an umbrella calling for publishing, open access publishing, growing towards the European Open Science Cloud. And this is where we think if we make more journals fit to be integrated into the European Open Science Cloud, they will also be fit to be integrated into other large-scale data aggregators. And this is not just Web of Science and Scopus, as some research assessment managers would demand of journals, but this is also more open data aggregations. So everything that is there that creates data aggregations and can enhance data, this is where journals should be visible, and their content. We have specific objectives for this, because in order to proceed with this, and we'll be running for 3 years, and we started in January, we need to have tangible objectives that we want to follow. And that's clear. We want to evolve and strengthen the diamond open access institutional publishing landscape, but we are aware that, for instance, smaller commercial service providers or smaller publishers, they can also benefit from these results, because at the end of the day, the rationale and the aim is to improve science and its communication. And we want to work on the interoperability of existing diamond institutional publishing practices. And this is where we heavily rely on the results of the DIAMAS project that Johan presented to you. And then, of course, raise visibility, discoverability, because that leads towards recognition. And the recognition shouldn't be just for the journals and the content, it should be also for this model that the public sector has a right to be publishing, and not just a right, it should be acknowledged in its own accord. And the diamond open access model, the institutional one, should be really seen as somebody, as a model that is just as good as the commercial one, while the commercial publishers would always like to tell us that gold open access is if we earn a lot of money. That's gold open access. Capacity building, Johan mentioned all of this. I don't need to repeat it again. And what we want to reach is a diamond open access web of commons: knowledge, technology, expertise, interoperability, and joint standards. You can read yourself, so I won't mention. What I said already is that many of these consortium partners are publishing entities in themselves, and many of us are networked in our own national, local, disciplinary networks. So don't be surprised if you get reached out to, and then get engaged, get in touch, because this is how we can spread out this knowledge. It's not that this project is secretly working and then after 3 years we come up with some results. We really need the input of communities, because this is something like a funding for the larger community. And all of the partners are just stakeholders for their own communities, representatives. We have 7 work packages. Of course, the usual one: administration and user needs, community building, sustainability. And we have several productive work packages, and they will be focusing on the usual journal platform softwares. Of course, on OJS, Open Journal System, but also on Janeway and Lodel, because what we see is that there are new models emerging, new software is emerging. There is Orvium, there is PubPub, there is other initiatives, and if it benefits OJS, it will most likely also benefit other softwares. And our work package 4 is the one that is really developing, and they started from day one because they knew already some of the backlogs of OJS, and they were tackling them immediately. So we consider them, we have the productive ones and the backbones are, for instance, the ones that make sure that whatever we develop will find its way into sustainability, because we've all seen lovely plugins, lovely standards, lovely small features of software that started to fade away as soon as the project was finished. And this is not the way it's supposed to be here. And our project approach is quite practical, so that, for instance, we try to find a vocabulary where we can talk to each other and understand each other, and really come from publishing and not try to reinvent publishing, but take it as it is already, because all these smaller journals and these smaller publishers that have survived against the high competition of the commercial sector that tries to dominate it, they have shown already that there is resilience and there's wisdom in the model, and we don't need to recreate this.
Margot, are you finishing up?
I'm finishing up because I don't need to talk you through this, and we are pretty much on time with what we do. We will be reaching out to communities, so when you hear the name Craft.OR, get involved, because this is really for us as a community. And with that, I'm basically done, because I want to emphasize once again, when open science came around and said, basically, this is just science done right. What I see is that Diamond Open Access Institutional Publishing is, at the end of the day, just publishing done right.
That's
that I'm finished.
Thank you very much. A great point to end on there. Thank you, Margot. Don't go away. I've got a couple of questions for you as well. Really connecting and looking at that federated technology ecosystem and how to organize that better and to build those technical bridges, if you like. If we're talking about creating a more equitable open access system, and particularly focusing on the technology and the organization, how are you going to manage, how are you going to address the inequities there concretely? I think that must be a really difficult job, particularly in the area of technology.
In a way, yes, and in a way, no. Because what we, so for instance, when open source software for publishing came around, the open journal system was, in my point of view, a real game changer, because suddenly technology was available, first of all, without cost, and second, highly professional technology that before was only available for the larger commercial players. And open source paradigm around publishing opened doors that were closed before for many individual researchers. And what, for instance, the discussion that Pierre and Johan had in the beginning, how do you own a journal if you don't even have a bank account or if you're not a legal entity? So before that, it was even more challenging to, how do you own just a workflow if you have nothing? So open source opened this door. And what we also see is that, for instance, the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier, or ORCID, those are technologies that have been developed from the commercial sector, but they have also been a game changer to the institutional sector, because suddenly we have standards, industry standards, that are available to everybody. So what we try to do here is to make sure that everybody can play on the technology level that they deserve. And they all deserve better than what the commercial sector wants us to think. And there is some...
I love that.
And there is so much to improve, even with small things. So for instance, if you tell an independent group of researchers, we can provide you with DOI, or we can provide you with a plugin that you don't need to write yourself. And we can tell you that a capacity center of institutions will take care that this plugin that you build into your workflow and becomes almost indispensable, that this is going to live on. So this is where I think equity doesn't come natural with technology, but at least we will lower the barrier. Absolutely. And if you think of that small picture that Johan showed at the end of his slide, we can't provide everybody with boxes, but what we can do is have the material sitting there that you build your own box to reach up to that fence.
Love it. Thank you so much, Margot. Now, you were also really appealing to the community, and that you want to serve the community, you want to engage with them. So if people are interested in collaborating, they are developing tools, they want to connect, they want to become more interoperable, they want to work on some of these standards with you, how do they get involved?
One thing is, for instance, look up at our website who the partners are, and then think whether you, with any of these partners, and ever had any contact, and then reach out to that partner, because like that could be helpful, because maybe they speak your language, they work in your discipline, they use something. That's one thing. And then, of course, we have the usual stuff like Mastodon and Twitter and a newsletter. And you can also write me an email or whatever, but let us know about this. And I like the image that Johan says, we're not going to build one of these, another not really needed things in Brussels, because we come from suffering ourselves. All of us in this consortium are suffering on some point around technology.
So it's a kind of a self-help group for technology OA Diamond publishers.
That might look as if we are our own bubble, but we turned it the other way around and said we are all our own guinea pigs. We are on our test beds, like in this early ages of vaccinations, where doctors and researchers would always try on their own.
Perfect. Margot, I'm going to have to let you go for the moment, because we also have Palomera with us, and I know that Niels is raring to go. We've got Niels Stern with us today. He's the OAPEN Managing Director and Co-Director of DOAB, and he's the scientific coordinator of the Palomera project, which has a little bit of a different scope to the other two projects. Welcome, Niels.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And you're right, we have a slightly different scope as we are dealing with books rather than, well, mainly journals in DIAMAS and CraftAway. So the focus for Palomera is books, and the acronym is policy alignment of open access monographs in the European research area, PALOMERA. And what we are trying to find out in this project is what are the challenges preventing more research funders from including books in their open access policies, and then think about how we can overcome these challenges. And when we talk about books, we mean academic, peer-reviewed books, monographs, edited collections, chapters, and other long-form formats. Just a few facts about the project. It comprises 16 partners from across Europe. It is co-led by Operas and OEPEN, and it began in January 2023 and runs for 2 years, and it's funded under Horizon Europe. It kind of came out of a few sort of previous activities and studies and projects. One was a study commissioned by Knowledge Exchange in 2016, a study which was made by Ilko Ferreira, Francis Pinter, and myself, called A Landscape Study on Open Access Monographs, Open Access and Monographs. And we studied 8 European countries to find out about, basically the state of the art when it comes to monographs and open access, and came up with a number of recommendations. Following from that study, there were 2 workshops organized by Knowledge Exchange, and out of the latter came a call for action, which is the Investing in Open Access Book Infrastructure, proposing important recommendations on infrastructure and other things for open access books. And then 2 years ago, the Open Access Books Network issued the Voices from the Open Access Books Community sessions, 5 sessions that were exploring different aspects of open access books and giving input to Coalition S recommendations for OA books. And then finally, OEPEN was funded by the European Research Council, and this project, ERC OEPEN 2019 project, hosted workshops for funders, and based on that, we sort of came up with ideas for also for PALOMERA. So this is the background. Now, behind all this, the objective of my own organization as for the project is really to speed up the transition to open access for academic books. And for this project, it is really focusing on supporting funders, but also institutions in the development and implementation of open access book policies. And we have some specific objectives, where the first one is to investigate the landscape. So we are collecting data, qualitative data in the form of documents. We will very soon be issuing a survey and also conducting interviews. We try to collect quantitative data, which is quite difficult for books. And then the second objective is to perform analysis on the data that we collect. Then thirdly, to engage the communities, because we need to not only be working in a isolated bubble with funders and institutions, but also involve those actors who are involved in book publishing in general. So we will be issuing validation events throughout the project. I'll come back to that. Fourthly, we will come up with recommendations, and we will also work on some resources to support those recommendations. And then finally, which is important, I think, is that we aim to bridge also beyond the European research area to other regions in the world. Some of the key milestones, I want to focus just on the validation events here. So once we have gathered the data, we will be inviting basically everyone, especially using the Open Access Books Network, but also in other ways, inviting the community to give feedback on our findings. Then once we have the analysis ready in a draft version, we will share that and have another kind of validation event, again inviting for feedback from the community. And finally, once we get to the stage of issuing recommendations, we will also be validating those with the community. And then we will be hosting, of course, a final conference in towards the end of the project in December 2024. Now, of the expected results, firstly, this data, that's this landscape study that we'll be doing, we will collect a lot of documents that are relevant to funding and open access books, and we will gather that in a knowledge base, which will be also sustained beyond the project. It will connect to the OAPEN OA Books Toolkit. Secondly, we will issue, of course, a report on the analysis. Then we have the engagement with the community through the validation events, where we invite all of you and everyone else to give their input. And we will, as I said, have the first validation event in January. And then the fourth sort of major result will be the recommendations. And the resources that we will be issuing is first and foremost a forum for funders. And we already had a quite successful first meeting with funders last month, where we managed to convene research funders representing more than 20 countries, also from outside of Europe. And then we will look into how we could design what we call a policy development tool. And that could help funders who think about developing or updating policies. And then, as I mentioned, finally, we want to engage internationally with research funders. So those are basically the results. And we don't have a Twitter account, but we do have a hashtag. So please use that if you use Twitter. Otherwise, we will be issuing updates and so on, also very much through the OA Books network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niels. So coming back to the theme of creating community-driven pathways to equitable open scholarly publishing, and PALOMERA is quite focused on policy making to support open access books. How are you addressing more equity in OA through PALOMERA? It's a difficult one because you're particularly focused on policy making. So with services or building capacity amongst the diamond publishers, connecting technology and organizing that more efficiently and collaboratively, we've heard from the other projects. But can you tell us a little bit how you are trying to address some of the inequities in OA book publishing through policy making? I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So, of course, I've tried to think about, how we do this. And firstly, I would say that we are only 5-6 months into the project. So we are exploring the landscape. We're trying to understand the landscape better. Of course, we have background information, as I mentioned. So it's not a first time we think about this, of course. But I think when it comes to equity, we have addressed it specifically in the project proposal as well, that we want to support policies that support bibliodiversity, that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when it comes to book publishing, I think we should remember that policies are very important drivers for open access. And of course, the policies that will be issued have huge consequences downstream for publishers, for authors, and others who engage in publishing. So it is important that the policies that are being developed recognize equity when they're being developed. And I think this project hopefully can help funders find ways to do that. So when it comes to book publishing, of course, as was presented in DIAMAS and Craft Away, Institutional publishing is important. We see a lot of library publishing, new university presses, but we also have a large network, or not even a network, but a large number of small independent publishers. They can be commercial, they can be non-commercial, but they are all important to nurture scholarly book publishing. And they very often make no money out of it, but they make often very good books. So we want to make sure that that policies that come out don't make life too difficult, that actually policies can support that kind of diversity in publishing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's the I think on the one side, and that's why we need to engage with the community to make clear to the funders as well what are the important things to consider when you issue policies. Another aspect of equity, I think, is when we actually discuss with funders. So that, you know, acknowledging that funders are very different across the European research area, and the context in which they operate are very different. So depending on where you are geographically in Europe or beyond Europe. And I think we saw that in the first Funder Forum meeting we held last month, that some funders are very advanced in policymaking, others are not, haven't even begun developing policies. There's big differences in economies and so on. So this is part of what we're trying to do with the study. So we'll use the PESTLE approach in the analysis. So PESTLE is looking at the data with a political, economical, social, technical, legal, and environmental lens, and try to understand what are the different barriers for funders, and see how we can help them arrive with policies, and also ways to implement the policies through this project. But these are ambitions, and you know, we'll see where we take it.
Thank you so much. So I actually have all of the projects. They're ready, willing, and able, I think, to join now the panel discussion. Thank you very much, everybody, for presenting your projects in such a short space of time. Would like to invite everybody in the audience to ask any questions they might have on the projects in the chat, and they will be then dealt with by the project leads. So I'd rather like to spend time on discussion rather than answering some of those more detailed questions, if you allow me. So I'd like to come back to the panel. So usually, so many of us are involved in EC projects, and we have enough on our plate dealing with the EC project at hand. But this is really quite new to have such a joined up approach, where you have this joint vision that you were all speaking to, right? So for more equitable open access scholarly publishing, and looking at that ecosystem and engaging with your communities. How are you collectively? So the three of you, it's a new kind of family. How are you going to create a coordinated roadmap for a more community-driven pathway to OA? How are you going to do that? Some of us have only just started, I know, but how would you like to get started, perhaps even? Pierre?
So I will not provide a complete answer, but the beginning of an answer, and I let my fellow comrades to add other ideas. But I just want to say that this very first webinar is the start of it. So we have the three projects presenting and discussing the three projects all together in a common webinar, and you have announced already that this is the first of a series. So that's a good way to start discussing all together with the whole community gathered by the three projects how to establish and how to write down this collective roadmap that we want to do together.
Johan?
Yes, in addition to what Pierre says, there's also some formal, we also have some formal meetings about this. I mean, first of all, we are all involved in each other's projects. So we have sort of a look into each other's projects. And so we also have established a number of work packages that work together already in terms of communications, for instance. Our communications work packages already work together. Finally, we have also established an international advisory board that is similar across the projects or the same with people who are knowledgeable about OA in a more global context and who can advise us about what things going forward in Europe. So we have various built-in into the three projects, various mechanisms to ensure that we are well coordinated and that we help each other where possible, and also that we don't duplicate work. That is also very important. Yeah.
Certainly, thank you. Was it Margot next? Sorry, I took my eye off the ball. Ladies first, Margot.
These three projects came and they were met by people who were working in that direction already. So when we tried to prepare for this webinar, we realized that we have been anyway working on common values and common missions. And one, for instance, that I think is really, really strong in the group of these consortia, and you'll see there's a large overlap. That is, for instance, making sure that what we develop stays in the hand of communities. So we really look very carefully into governance structures. We look into sustainability, and we look into who would be losing if we went that way and who would be winning if we went that way. So to make sure that we look at the stakeholders as an ecosystem. And I've been bashing a bit on the commercial sector. And that doesn't mean that I would like to do away with the sector and abolish an industry, how it was said. But that what I would like to see is there are smaller and there are bigger commercial players. And I'd like to see the smaller ones who are moving in a similar direction, that they want to strengthen the scientific communication at large, that they can come along. And I think this is something like a joint vision where we've been working in that direction anyway. And then these projects came and we had the chance to engage in these projects. But these projects didn't need to tell us in what kind of direction we want to evolve.
Thank you, Margot. Niels.
Yeah, it's difficult to be the last in this row of good thoughts, but I can't help thinking about, this is really about also people getting together, as Pierre mentioned, and of course across the projects are people that know each other very well, but it's not just a few people anymore. It's a lot of people, right? And I think this webinar really is so encouraging to see that such a large group, diverse group across countries really are engaging and trying to find ways. And it's not only about journals or about books, it's about how we support scholarly publishing. So I think I really look forward to future discussions, future meetings that can sort of spark more conversations and include more people, because over the years, I've been engaged in open access for books for 15 years. And at the beginning, it was very few people. And now we see a lot of interest. And that's sort of really motivating. And I think that is a pathway we have begun together with many people that, will take us somewhere. So I feel that it's something we have a lot in our packs, but we are creating as we move forward.
Thank you. Margot.
I would like to add one small thing that I think unites these projects, and there's a larger family to these projects. Yes, under the funding scheme that we have, which is usually the European Commission, you could believe that this is only for Europe. But I think that all of these, basically almost everybody in these consortia that we have of these three projects is trying to reach out beyond Europe, beyond the political Europe, and because at the end of the day, science is a global endeavor. And if we only strengthen one part of the world, we lose wisdom of the other part of the world. And so this is where I also think that it came quite natural to us to collaborate as projects, even though you could say, oh, this is on books and this is on journals and this is on Europe. But no, this is not it. At the end of the day, it's trying to keep the communication alive of science, of scholarly communication.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So building, I mean, this is a very positive vision. There's lots organized to move this community engagement forward. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the series, and I hope the audience is too. But let's also be real. I mean, I think Margot was also saying we are all looking at the many different types of stakeholders, large and small, the winners and the losers, as Margot also mentioned. I think what's really key for all of these projects is that we are gaining a much richer understanding of what these communities are about, what their needs are. But in that community, what are the blockers to our vision, to our common vision for more equitable open access? What are the bears on the road? I'm not sure whether that's an English expression or whether I've just translated it from the Dutch. But, you know, what are the fears? Are there things one needs to watch out for or has already encountered? What are those blockers to our common vision? You don't need to come up with a long list, just one will be fine. What's one of the key blockers to this, would you say? And of course, with every challenge, we can help resolve or mitigate that problem. But is it a particular group? Is it a process? Pierre?
Margot raised her hand.
Or is it Margot first?
Yeah, Margot first.
One of the challenges that whenever we try to activate and engage smaller communities is that they are small, meaning that if you have to choose between, for instance, getting your next issue out or engaging in a sustainability and community group, most journal editors will have the tendency to focus on their own content because there is only 24 hours in a day. And this is something that we have to face, that this will be a constant problem, that we can pester communities over and over, and we send them newsletters and mails, and we invite them to webinars. But what we need is, and there was a question in French, how do we build in sustainability? This is, for instance, one thing is that we have to make it very clear to stakeholders within communities that it's worth engaging in something that goes beyond your daily operation, because that's the only way we all manage to upscale and live in a more healthy environment than most of these diamond institutional open access journals are doing now. Some of them are really role models, so this is not in general, but we have too many that are still sitting in the valley of suffering. And it might be that we don't get them out because they, at least I know my little valley of suffering.
Oh, that sounds terribly painful. Pierre, are you going to take us out of the valley of suffering, or are you just going to bring us back down?
No, out of the valley as always. I just want to identify another blocker, which is really the question of a lack of recognition and acknowledgement. Just to give you a short example, I was recently talking to an open science officer at the Ministry of a country outside of Europe, presenting our Diamond project and what we want to do with the Diamond Action Plan and what we want to do to support the growth of Diamond Open Access. And our first reaction was to say, okay, but what about the fact that Diamond journals are scientifically of worse quality than commercial journals? So in her head, there was this obvious evidence that commercial journals were of better scientific quality than Diamond journals. For me, it's not proven at all. but there is a lack of recognition, a lack of acknowledgement. So the first thing we have to work on is to provide, particularly to the funders and the policymakers in the institutions, a better representation of the reality of Diamond OA in terms of scientific quality, because a lot of publishing venues are very scientific, high quality scientific quality, and their reputation is jeopardized by their lack of technical capacity. So, for example, if we improve their technical capacity and then at the same time we show that in terms of scientific quality, Diamond OA is not worse, but at the same level or even better than commercial publishing, then it will be a blocker that we will alleviate. And there are some questions in French, so I don't know, in the chat panel, I don't know if you want us to answer it, but Margot started already.
Yes, Pierre, if you could have a look at those French questions, because I certainly won't be able to. And if you can answer any on the fly, or if there are
I did answer
Oh,
some,
you're
but Pierre
right.
should check if I answered correctly.
Okay, excellent. But over to you, Margot.
One of the blockers that we have to overcome is paradoxical behavior of researchers, because if you talk to researchers that are publishing and researchers, and they could be the same persons, who then in their role of research management and research assessment, you suddenly see this really paradoxical behavior of, yeah, we know that the impact factor is a problem, but then suddenly research assessment is coming along these narratives that Pierre just described. And this is, I haven't really found a clue to this, but we have to be aware in these discussions that this is not the group of good researchers and they're the problematic ones, but that this sometimes runs together in one group, and that there is something like a paradoxical behavior when it comes to everybody suffers from certain research assessment practices, but it's the only ones who really can solve it is research itself, because there won't be a fairy coming down from the funders and saying, we solve these problems for you. And if you then follow the root of this paradoxical behavior, you often see that people are caught in small local traps or dilemmas, and we can't solve these. But what we can do is create more transparency and, for instance, deconstruct the myth of commercial publishing being better. And this is where we can maybe work on this blocker of paradoxical behavior of researchers themselves. It's my conviction.
Thank you. Johan, would you like to add to that or bring in a new point?
No, I'll bring in a new point. The point that's been raised also in the chat a bit. I mean, I agree with everything my colleagues have said. I think indeed, research assessment is key here. We have to make sure, and we have to make sure that we align the journals in terms of quality so that we can really compete. Well, I mean, my dream, my vision is, for every commercial journal, we have a Diamond Open Access journal that is as good as better. And then I would like to see the researcher who says, I'll rather pay 2,000 or 3,000 euros to pay in that commercial journal than to pay for free in that non-commercial Diamond Open Access scholar-owned, community-owned journal. That's the situation I want to arrive at. I mean, I'm at that situation myself with my journal. I mean, I can say that, my journal can compete with the commercial ones and is better. Of course, I was going to say that, right? But let's mention another problem. And the other problem is money. I mean, and sustainability. How do we make, I mean, it's nice to have a dream. It's nice to have the dream of this Diamond Open Access Hub, but how do we realize this? Because, I mean, in order to provide, I mean, the projects are finite, right? 3 and 5 years. I mean, what do we do after the project? That was a question that was asked in the chat. And so we will have to convince, and that is a blocker for now, we will have to convince the competent authorities that we need long-term sustainable money for this. I mean, and this is not an unusual question. Like I also mentioned in the chat, the research community has large infrastructures at their disposal for doing research, right? I'm thinking of things like the Large Hadron Collider, the telescope in Chile, the Square Kilometer Array. These are things that scientists all over the world use in a communal fashion. And I think for Diamond Open Access, we have to think in the same way. This is large scale infrastructure. It's distributed. Yes, it's not a single telescope. It's a distributed, it's a network of infrastructures, but it is an infrastructure. And I mean, for some reason, people think that stones and mirrors are more concrete than digital infrastructure, right? But that's I think a blocker that we need to take away. We need to say, look, you know, we live in the 2020s. If you don't understand that digital infrastructure is infrastructure and is really at the service of the entire research community, not just a few physicists discovering the universe, right? I mean, then, you know, this is what we need to do. This is where we need to go. So that's a narrative I think that we need to start developing for the ministries out there, for those of us who fund research in a global fashion.
Very true. And we also need to have those financial mechanisms that allow us to be able to fund digital, right? And that's at the level of ministries, research funders, and libraries. Yes, Niels.
I just wanted to add, I think, I don't know whether I think it's an opportunity really, which was raised by one of the funders that we had recently in this new funder forum, that the evaluation framework for books should be really considered jointly. And it is not influenced by an existing journal impact factor. There are many different ways to assess book publishing, but we don't have a journal impact factor. And this means that there are other opportunities to discuss how do we actually want to assess research that has been published as books. And I think this opens the door to really interesting conversations. And I don't know if there's a bear behind that door, but at least we should think about how we manage that process and keep that in good conversations with those communities that will be influenced by it. So I think there's we're still at a quite early stage, and I think books have been in policymaking parked on the side for quite many years because they were thought of as more difficult in some ways, and you know, some thought about royalties or licensing that could be more difficult, or other aspects. I think we've sort of come to another point now where we can have open conversations about this. But then, of course, also coming back to the question in the chat, the long term, how do we continue this, of course, requires more funding. This project, PALOMERA, is just one stepping stone on the way. I think an important frame, apart from the funder, of course, Horizon Europe, the Commission, is Operas as an important entity in this space that also connects these projects and is providing services and also engagement broadly in the social sciences and humanities.
Thank you very much. I'd actually like to invite members of the audience to add any thoughts that they have, any ideas, either things that we should be thinking about to realize that pathway more quickly, more easily, or to warn us of any additional blockers. I know that there's a conversation going on in the chat, but I would really love to have to hear a little bit more from the community at large here. So outside of the panel, would anybody like to join in? Sorry, Pierre, I have a think about that whilst I take Pierre's comment.
No, it's not a comment, it's just to voice a question that was raised in the—
Oh yes, please do.
Yes, it was asked twice, two times. So it's a question for Margot about how do you consider the inclusion of Diamond OA into EOSC, thanks particularly to the Craft OA project. So
last week I was at a EOSC conference. And the reality, I think, is that most of the people who are already active in the EOSC are focusing on research data management and research data repositories. But if we think about scholarly communication, then publishing and research data management, those are building blocks of it. And what I think needs to be done is that we think these two domains more in a connected sense, because in the older days, you had to bake your research data into your publication. And then there was a bit of a separation. Then you were able to sort of have your publication and the data was following along. In our newer thinkings and concepts, we can have it the other way around. You have your research data, and then the publication follows the data sets. And so this is where I think that the EOS can start to open up, because we basically think about structured, standardized information, helping science, helping communication, helping the narratives around science. And so what we can, so the most simple thing is that we want to see as many as possible Diamond open access institutional publishing units being enrolled in the EOSC marketplace. So they sign up, they describe themselves. But what we also want is that we will have a higher level of interoperability, so that research data is not the only thing that sits in the EOSC, and then maybe on the marketplace you have some of the journals registered, but that the content can travel and can be interoperable no matter whether it's a published data set or it's a publication. That is, in a nutshell, how we try to work on this, and also enable platforms to sign up, because maybe you just need help, somebody who explains to you why it makes sense to go through the effort of registering at some platform or some portal. And maybe you just need a webinar that explains you what to fill in into what field. And this is what we will do in Craftway, in a very practical sense.
Thank you, Margot. So I'm opening up to the floor. Also, are there any other questions that you have to our panel? The time has really flown. I hope you found it interesting so far, as the first one in a series. Are there any additional questions? Lots of shy people today. Anyone like to open the mic? Just scanning.
There are really interesting questions in the chat. So if you feel you're ready to present your question to the wider audience here, I really encourage the people, because the questions are great.
Can you maybe pick one that you like, Margot, because I haven't been able to follow that. Is there something that you would like to speak to or would be interesting for the panel? Let me just have a look as well.
One was, for instance, around sustainability. How do we make sure that we really reach sustainability with what we do? Yes, we sort of brushed upon, but it was a question in French. And then there is also one other thing about the paradox behavior of researchers, and that's a comment from Katarina Botic, that it's researchers' reality. And this, for instance, would be good if, Katarina, if you want to explore on this a bit more.
Yeah, so that directly relates to something you said, Margot, earlier. Katarina, would you like to?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, if you could speak a little bit louder.
Is it better? Is it better now?
Slightly.
Sorry. Okay, I can't put it louder.
No, you can have a go. Do speak. You have our attention.
Okay, so the problem is that I'm sitting here. For example, I'm editing 2 journals. My institution comes from humanities, and we do all our work pro bono, so in kind. Right. Except for proofreading, foreign language proofreading, and partly for publishing of one of the journals. The other one is not being published in physical form, just online. So the problem is, okay, I'm sitting here because I really think that this subject we are talking about today is very important. And I completely agree with you that open access is the best way to do science. But the problem is that we have every 5 years, we have evaluation as scientists. So I'm spending my time on journals that I can't spend on my scientific work. In 5 years' time, each five-year period, we have more demands on us. So how many high quality journal papers we published, for example. In humanities, we also evaluate books, but the journal publications should be or with the impact factor less in humanities, but with the, for example, the quartile number. And we should publish only in journals that are listed in VOS and Scopus. These are considered the high-ranking journals. They bring, let's say, not only prestige, but they bring us scientific merit. Of course, we publish in many other journals. We publish in many other publications. For example, the problem is also evaluating the conference edited volumes, which were not being evaluated or not being having any value for us until very recently. So I can talk only about our system. Maybe the other countries have different systems, but this is the problem. How can we can implement in our journals, because we will do it. But the problem is that people writing for our journals, they won't be having, this is not an asset for them, you know. They will be publishing because you always publish a lot more than it's being highly evaluated. But this is the reality. So if one scientist said, or one editor says, yes, I'm for the open access, but then it is he or she is publishing in the paper in the journals that are paid for. This is basically the reality. We can't escape from this. Not until the whole system is more robust and there is a pressure on policymakers to change how they evaluate open access publications. I hope that you heard all that I had. Definitely.
I think you need to amplify your voice and to tell your colleagues to repeat that because they really need to hear it from you as well. But I think Margot would, policymakers need to hear from the researchers, and they are shouting louder than ever before. And we've got Kawara and things obviously working hard to change. Margot.
I think the policies and, for instance, the conclusion from the European Council is in a way really stating this problem, because obviously this can't be solved within a researcher. So we can't ask a researcher to comply to a problematic research assessment scheme and then at the same time make herself loud and tell the policymakers that they need to change and produce high quality content. This won't work. So, and one of the challenges that I see is that these schemes of how is research assessment done on a national scale, that this has often detached itself from the way that research is done on the ground. And this, we shouldn't place the burden again on the researchers, say, you need to inform your policymakers. And then there we need the high level politics to make sure that the policymakers are aware of the situation. And while the conclusions are non-binding yet, I see that there is something like a shift, that it's the high-level policymaking that makes sure that diamond open access is not simply done away with, yeah, we also need this little local stuff and this little niche publications, but that they because there is a huge problem in the commercial sector, and that is money, because the prices are going up like crazy. And suddenly there is something like a wake-up call that maybe if we press everybody into these commercial outlets like Web of Science, Scopus, and Wiley, and Elsevier, and Springer, the prices will be going up, meaning the whole scientific system won't be able to sustain its own communication system. And so I wouldn't place the burden on the researchers themselves. Here, I think we need to make sure that whenever we can poke just one layer up, we can say there is a policy change going on the highest level, and it needs to trickle down again.
I agree. I do think we need to come at it from different levels, but the good news is I can tell you just by chance this week, I'm facilitating CONOS, which is the National Open Science Coordinators, and we are talking about this topic. We're going to be talking about Diamond, we're talking about transformative agreements, other models, what do we need to look at, what might we consider funding more of in the future. So this is at front of mind of national policymakers as well. But the policymakers, they are listening to their researchers. So it's all of us need to work together to amplify some of these important topics. But I would like to thank all of you who still stayed on beyond the time. Thank you so much for coming to this event. I'd like to thank all of the speakers as well, obviously, for their lively interaction. I'd like to also thank Oliver from Liebe in the background, looking after us. And I'd like to announce that in the autumn, we will have another event, which the PALOMERA project will be hosting. We haven't got a date yet, but we will let you know. Here's some more information if you'd like to get up to date on some of the developments of the projects you've heard about today, or if you'd like to get it more involved in some of our activities, because we really would like to involve you, please do reach out. So I think I'm going to close this meeting for today. My feeling is we could have talked much longer than we did, but thank you so much for coming. And we hope to see you at another joint event in the autumn. Wishing you a lovely summer in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for moderating, Vanessa.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye-bye.